There are lots of reasons why we misbehave. Now, I've given you kind of one lever, one lens through which to look at it in terms of motivation. I think that's a useful one. But there's other ones too. Let me give you some fairly simplistic advice, which is that if you got a child that comes into your classroom, whether they're 4 years old or 14 years old, they come into your classroom and they're kind and polite and lovely, and you think, oh, what a great kid. And then you get another one who's late and lazy and rude, and you go, boo, no more of them, please. Neither of these children invented themselves. Neither of them created themselves on the spot. Every single one of those children is the product of their circumstances. And they're the product of their life experiences up to that point. They didn't invent themselves. They're not Madonna. You know, they're not Salvador Dali. They don't think, oh, who am I today? Right? They're not Boy George. Sorry if my cultural reference points are very ancient. They tend to pick up the habits and behaviors that they've been taught. I mean, I've got two children at home, two little kids. I say little, 8 and 6. They still feel little to me. I'm sure they always will. And when they're born, I mean, many of you will know this. When they're born, they know nothing. Right? They know nothing. They don't have to brush their teeth or comb their hair or speak or read or write or scrape a plate or format an essay or do a show and tell or play with Duplo. They don't know any of that. They're not born with any of it. We have almost no behavior hardwired into us. We've got some instinctive behavior, like, you know, flinching and blinking and so on, sleeping, breathing, that kind of thing. But we don't have any of what I would call the conscious behavior that we're interested in, like how to be a great student, like waiting your turn and sharing and putting your hand up and conducting yourself in an assembly or taking part in a debate or a show and tell or whatever. All that behavior, which is not on the curriculum, is learned somewhere. And if you're lucky, you learn a lot of it. If you come from a very fortunate home, not necessarily rich, just a fortunate home, then somebody will have explained at some point in your infancy or the early stage of your life how to be patient, how to be kind, how to wait your turn, how to put your hand up, how to speak confidently to an adult, how to deal with setbacks, how to queue up, how to be kind, how to hold a door open. You know, loads of little behaviors we take for granted. But that needs to be taught. They all need to be taught. And some children get less of that. Now, the first category of children, the lucky kids, they are far, far more classroom ready because they already know how to do a lot of stuff you want them to do. And there's some kids with less of that, and they know less, but, you know, you can teach them. And then there's some kids who get taught very, very toxic habits, kids who come from dislocated or dysfunctional family homes, where, for instance, if every day mum and dad come home and batter them for no reason, I mean, not as if there's a good reason to do so, then children learn different habits, don't they? I mean, some of them learn to hide. Some of them learn to lie. Some of them learn to fight back. Some of them become very cruel indeed. And some of them don't. You know, human beings are wonderful and flexible, although they're not invulnerable. My point is this, is that we're the products of our environment. We learn habits that we think are useful for us in that spot, in that space. Some of these habits are useful in schools and some of them aren't. But the good news is this, if behavior is taught, then it's a curriculum. I call it the behavior curriculum. Sometimes I call it the conduct curriculum. And if some children have been taught it, other children haven't, then, well, guess what? We can teach it too. We can teach kids how to behave. But it means we're going to have to think about it really consciously and explicitly. We can't just hope they behave. We can't just welcome them into our classrooms and say, behave, you know, as if it's magic. Because they don't know what you mean. I mean, they might have a rough idea, or they might have a close idea, or they might have a bad idea, or they might completely disagree with your idea of behavior. So the important thing is you've got to teach them exactly what you want them to do. Don't be vague. Don't be woolly. Don't say, oh, I'm sure you know how to do this. They don't. It is ridiculous to ask someone to do something that they don't know how to do. I can't speak Armenian, I know, or Welsh. And if you asked me to translate something from Welsh into Armenian, I would struggle, I assure you. I certainly wouldn't be able to work it out just by looking at the two pieces of text with a Rosetta Stone of some kind. No, I wouldn't know how to do something I didn't know how to do. And children don't know how to behave if no one's ever taught them how to behave. And a lot of the behaviors we take for granted are really, really hard for them. So for example, many kids don't know what we mean by good behavior. So that's one reason why kids muck about. They don't do what we want them to do because they don't know what we want them to do. Never underestimate how explicit You have to make behaviours to kids. This is exactly what I want to do. This is how I want to come in the room. This is how I want to leave the room. This is how I want to ask a question or answer a question, and so on. You got to think of it all. Ask yourself, what do I want kids to do on an average day? And then, write it down by all means. And then think, well, I wonder if they all know how to do it. Well, let me at least explain it to them so at least they know. And really front load this. Make this a big part of your first encounter with children. And if you haven't done it by now, do it now. I mean, not right now, obviously, because it's kind of late in the day. But, tomorrow or next week or whatever, but do it so the kids know what they expect the behaviour is. The next thing is they might know what you mean, but they often don't know how to do it. Now, let me explain. If you ask kids to do 5 minutes of silent reading, they might have never done silent reading in their lives, or they might know how to read, but they've never read for longer than 4 minutes. So the kids who read all the time, they find that easy, silent reading. Oh, good. Oh, boy, more reading. I love it. And then there are kids who can read. They know what you mean. They don't have to have it explained to them, but they find it harder than others because they're not used to it. It's not part of their habit. And then finally, there are a lot of kids who don't value the behaviour that you've asked of them. And this affects us all. Very rarely do any of us behave or demonstrate a behaviour when we don't think it matters, if that makes sense. So if you're driving along a motorway and you see the speed limit's 40 or 50, now, if you're like most people, you probably think, oh, well, 41, 42 is fine. I'm not saying it is. Please don't report me or anything. But there's a lot of people who think, 41, 42 is okay because they don't think it matters that much. They don't think that the world's going to end if you go to 41 in a 40 zone. I mean, obviously, PC Plod will disagree, and you'll get busted. And I say that as a participant myself a couple of years back in one of Her Majesty's driving safety awareness courses, because I was doing like 4 miles over the speed limit, and I was rightly caught and busted, and had to do one of those courses. But I too didn't think, does it really matter? I do now. I can assure you of that. Or if you've got a kid in the classroom and you say don't use your mobile phone, but if they think, who's it hurting? They'll be surprised if they do it when you're not watching. Or a kid, you've said, no drinking Diet Coke in the classroom. That's the second product placement. And the kid might think, yeah, but it's okay. Who am I hurting? So this is a big problem. So you've got to teach the kids to value the behaviour, which means at some point in the beginning of your relationship, you need to say, look, this is why we're doing all this. And I already gave you my example. I used to say, I want you to have a calm, safe, dignified learning space. I want to look after you. I want you to do really well. I want you to succeed. Stuff that I hope will resonate with them to some extent, at least some of it. I've never heard a kid say, no, I don't want to be safe and happy. Occasionally you get a few grumpy ones that don't say much, but by and large, most kids get it. Okay, I too would like a classroom that's nice. And I'm going to just mention this, that we underestimate at our peril how much kids really enjoy a well-run, structured lesson. They don't actually want chaos. I mean, a couple of people do. I mean, some people just want to watch the world burn, but they're not all the Joker. They're not all Heath Ledger. Most kids like a nice, safe environment, particularly vulnerable kids, particularly kids who are in fear of getting their faces punched in on a daily basis. They want a nice, structured, adult-run classroom. They need you to be a grown-up, so be the grown-up. Also, a lot of kids misbehave. Forgive me, a lot of talking here. Because they feel ashamed of themselves. They don't know how to do what you've asked them to do, which doesn't justify it in the slightest. But if kids don't know how to participate in a lesson because they've missed a lesson or they don't understand something and they're too shy to tell you they don't understand, or you don't have time to explain it to them, don't be surprised if they do something else. Or if a kid feels like they're embarrassed of reading in class, you've asked them to read, but they've got a very weak literacy level, don't be surprised if they do something else to distract from that fact. Again, it doesn't justify it, but I'm just saying it's a big reason. I think the third bullet point there is really important. Often kids misbehave because no one tells them no. I know that sounds a wee bit odd, but it's true. Often kids misbehave because nobody says stop doing that. We are naturally egotistical. We are creatures of habit, and we're naturally quite egotistical. And all that means is that we like to do what we like to do. All of that means is that we tend to do what we want until someone says stop. And in schools, we're the people that say stop. So while I have emphasized the fact that we need to teach kids how to behave, it's really important that we act as a constant reminder if they're doing the wrong thing. You've got to challenge it. It doesn't have to be with a sanction or a punishment all the time, but there has to be some kind of pushback. Because if nobody says stop, the kids just assume that it's okay to keep going. And if I'm honest, that's probably my number 1, 2, or 3 things I see newer teachers doing wrong. They let things slide. What we accept becomes acceptable. What we permit, we promote. And so we have to make sure that we don't just permit behavior. That's Doug Lamal's version. What we permit, we promote. So your job, if you don't know already, your job is to sell to the kids, to teach the kids, this is what we believe here. These are our values, and these are the behaviors that come from our values. It's almost useless to say, in this classroom, we will all respect each other. You've got to teach them the behavior that then suggests. So don't say to kids, be kind. Let them know what you mean by kindness. I mean, say be kind, obviously, but then give them lots of examples of what being kind means. Holding a door open, sharing a pen, saying please or thank you, helping somebody when they're stuck, whatever. But don't just leave it vague and woolly, because a lot of children, particularly children with behavioural issues, struggle with abstract concepts. It's a bit like we say to class, I want you to all be respectful of one another. Well, I can assure you that being respectful means 100 different things to 100 different people. Which brings me to my next point, which is that we have to teach, not just tell behaviour. You can't just tell somebody how to behave, you have to teach it to them. I couldn't just tell you how to drive, I'd have to teach it to you. Otherwise, you'll forget it instantly, because it's a very experiential thing. So we've got to create a curriculum where we teach behaviour to children. And one last thing I want to point out here is that novice learners and expert learners learn very differently. So when people are new to a subject, they need a lot of hand-holding and examples and foundational stuff and repetition. And when somebody's very good at something, when you're an expert, you can use project learning and independent learning and distance learning and so on a lot more. This is why the Open University is quite useful for some adults who are, even they have to be highly motivated though. Whereas an online self-guided learning system for children would, I think you'll agree, be extremely disastrous for like 99% of children. This brings me to the point of what is called the curse of knowledge or the curse of expertise. And it's basically this idea. When you're very good at something, it's easy to forget how hard it is for somebody who's not good at it. Does that make sense? So if you've got a PhD in maths, you forget how hard it is to do number bonds or something. Well, we are expert behaviours, and we often forget that what we find easy behaviourally is very, very hard for them. If you say, go and sit in the canteen and wait for me, I mean, what could be simpler? But a lot of kids struggle to sit still for more than a minute or two. So be really, really clear about what you want to do and to train them and teach them as much as you can. So be clear, use lots of sequences, lots of examples, repeat yourself until the stars burn cold. Check that they understood you. Correct common misconceptions or common mistakes. And this is basically pedagogy. This is exactly what you would do if you were teaching somebody a new chord on the guitar, or to conjugate a difficult French verb or a maths equation or something. This is a basic pedagogical teaching model, because behaviour is a curriculum. So how do you create this culture? Well, I've got 20 minutes to tell you, and it's just long enough. So don't worry, we're going to land this one nicely, I hope. There are 3 main things you need to do, in my opinion, to be a successful teacher. Because to be a successful teacher, you have to be a successful manager of behaviour. And I hope by now it's a wee bit clearer as to what I mean by behaviour and why I think it's important. So there's 3 main methods: norms and routines, which I'll explain in a second, and then you reinforce this by consequences, or what I sometimes call behaviour feedback. Now, 3 things there. You notice that the first 2 are the proactive side of the behaviour management. This is you teaching behaviour, and the last thing there is reacting to misbehaviour. I'll explain what I mean, I hope. Don't forget, incidentally, if you want to ask a question, please feel free to put